This is Big Picture on May 14th.
So before we begin our dialogue today, let's just join together in the heavenly realms. So it's a real encounter/dialogue. We're just seeing really that there aren't really two categories, and anything really is a similar concept if we really embrace and pull in all of heaven in whatever we're doing. So we're really walking 24/7. We're not either in an encounter or we're just chatting, or it's because we're living out of heaven 24/7. So that's why it's that mindset really it can be a huge change. So let's just go in together, join together, I should say. We're not going in. We don't go into heaven. We're already seated in heavenly realms. So we've got to be careful of our language as well, myself included, so we don't give people the wrong impression. We're really joining together where we're seated. So let's invite all of heaven to really bless our discussion today, to make it one of joy, of blessing, of abundance, of growth. We honor all. We all, or any who wish to come and join us. Any men in white linen. Let's sit on that seat of rest so that we see the big picture in rest, and not a burden on us, but a joy and an honor and a privilege to be part of it. Let's embrace and breathe in the joy of heaven. So in everything we do, we're bringing that joy. We can embrace all the 12 cities to come into full and operate out of full headship of Christ. So as we start this morning, I just felt huge emphasis on testimonies this week, really, really big from Father, and just saw it had begun to slip a bit. And it was something I saw very, very early on, was the importance of testimonies. And I thought it'd be good to just begin with a couple, just general things about what the journey's done for you. We're not talking about sharing your most intimate moment, but we're talking about what is the general fruit, really. What is the fruit of what you're doing? Because until we quantify that as well in our lives, be grateful for it and share that, sometimes we can be missing the bliss and joy of the journey. And yeah, it's interesting because I would have thought it would have flowed really, really naturally, but it hasn't. And so there may be some wrong thinking there. There may be some, I don't understand it. If anybody's got anything to share on insight on that, I personally don't get the wisdom around not sharing. I personally believe that everything you share, you're actually blessed, and as long as you're strong enough to, if there's any rejection, then that's the whole point. We've got to be strong enough to deal with that, not shy away from doing anything if there may be some comments, rejection or treatment. And in fact, actually, I was really I was really thinking to this week. Father got me really thinking about the persecution of the early disciples, and I was just really struck how little persecution we have to deal with. I mean, a few comments maybe on Facebook is the worst. And I just really saw how our generation, just felt Father saying, our generation has to really grow up. You know, we've become very soft because we haven't had persecution, because we haven't had wars, and so the danger of that is become very, very soft and fearful, and what can it do to bless me kind of mentality, which those other environments they don't create. And also, if you look at other faiths, the sacrifice they give for their faith is unbelievable. So I think I don't personally understand where sharing testimonies is an issue, but if anyone's got anything on that, or would just like to share a testimony, that would be wonderful.
I'd be glad to share, Jane. I think the biggest thing for me has been a sense of stepping into destiny that was waiting for me all my life. And this has been a great source of satisfaction for me to see what it was all for, and to find out what I was made for, and to step into it and find out that it is something that is fun and is something that I am able to do well. Great sense of satisfaction in that. Also, never have had this kind of fellowship before. I've had fellowship in local church before, which was good. This is as good, but it's also around a work that we're doing together that has real meaning and purpose, and is of great value. So fellowship around the work that we're doing together is a whole different thing, and I really enjoy it.
Okay.
I'd like to.
Sorry, Thomas. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, honey. If I start coughing, I'll just mute. Ditto on what Bill said. In addition, for me, this is where I come to hear other people's hearts, and it gives cause to, I think, expand my comprehension of various cultures and points of view, and the way the Lord works with so many of us. So for me to move from a fivefold, well, what started out as a charismatic environment, then it moved into a fivefold, which there was a whole nother education there. And now to move in what Four Faces of God Tabernacles. Some of this I moved into with very little language, except what I read in Scripture, and saw in quiet time with the Lord. But to be able to share with other people and listen to others share and learn various ways of expressing those things is a real blessing to me. I don't want to miss these opportunities, and so It also gives me ways to explain to other people that know me and ask me, what have I run off into this time? It helps me to try to share with them what I think I'm doing.
Yeah.
Because I don't always know what I'm doing.
Yes, all of us are in that boat. That's wonderful, Thomas. Thank you. Thank you, Bill, as well. That was great. Anyone else? Quickly?
Yes. I want to share too. I agree with Bill and with Thomas. And I want to add that to me, the benching was huge for me because it was like I was doing encounters by myself, you know. I see in the spirit, I hear in the spirit, and then the Lord directs me here and there. But when I was able to come together with people of like-mindedness, and something you see, somebody sees, there's a witness, confirmation that you're not going astray, you know, that helped me immensely. I could see that I can really grow and get to the ultimate fullness of God for me if I commit myself and have an intense desire. And I have brothers and sisters here who are joining arms with me. We acting and going together. So I'm not alone. It has made my journey more interesting and I'm accomplishing more.
That's wonderful. So you're saying, like, with with learning to bench with others as well, you feel you're accomplishing more through the benching.
Yes.
Any sense why that is?
I think it's more like one will put 1,000 to flight and two 10,000. Because when we come as a bench of 12 on the FF bench or the scroll bench or even the Wednesday bench, we do huge governmental acts I can't do on my own.
Yes, that's really, really good. I think that is just so true. I'd probably testify to that being one of the major blessings for me as well, this journey. And that's kind of what I love as well about the internet, because you can find people who are journeying at the same level. And it's so much harder to do that locally. So I've just been greatly blessed by this. I don't think I would be operating at anywhere near the level if I hadn't changed the wineskin and sought just to get a local group going. And I think it would have been a very, very different journey. So I'm really grateful to God for bringing this technology at this period in history as well. Phenomenal. Wonderful, guys. Well, I'd love that to be a trend, that we post a lot on the chat with the testimonies. I see that as a real strong heavenly blueprint. We do overcome by the word of our testimony, and also even beginning this session each time just with a couple of testimonies, and would be great to get different people, so we could almost rotate it so that everyone gets to share a testimony in the next few months. I think that would be a really good format as well. And we may even need to think and ask whether that should be a format for a lot of our groups. Because I really felt when I first started this journey, the one thing that was emphasized to me so strongly was that the way to do the Ecclesia, because I kept asking, how do we do it? How do we do it? One of the major ways was people must come to bring something. And so that really does, that's one way in which obviously we can bring through participation in encounters, but I think it's one way as well of really counting your blessings and coming with a full cup and saying, I really want to overflow here to bless anyone, because someone might be quite low. They might have had a hard week. They might even be battling a lot with lack of faith around this journey. And so I see it's so critical. So I just felt this group should be really open today. Go really where you want to go with it all. But the one small thing I thought might be useful around the dialogue is just what are the aspects of the big picture? Because I felt that Father saying just to really keep emphasizing over and over what is the big picture, because it's so multifaceted. Sometimes it's really easy to get down a certain vein of where you're going and then forget that there are actually other offshoots of the big picture that we're not really encompassing in our journey. So I felt him say any aspect of the big picture will keep people aware of those strands, and also if they've maybe focused on one or two very strongly and not the others. So if you had to just say in a couple of sentences some aspects of the big picture, it's obviously hard to say it in one sentence, although we have gone and a lot of times saying pulling everything under the headship of Christ, but I don't know, that would be an interesting question as well, as to whether that really sums up everything. But what are some of the aspects of the big journey, of the big picture, you feel?
Can I share this, Jane? And I got this recently from one of our bench meetings. And that was simply this. It became clear to me how important it was to try to get as well the new, this is how I processed it. It became clear to me that the new wineskin evangelism was to get as many people as we can into the new wineskin and even into the 100-fold as the what we've been calling the 144,000, and to just engage their scrolling who God has called them to be in what we're calling the final blueprint. It just became clear why it was so important to bring as many people as we can with them, because the last days are unfolding before us as we speak, and a lot of people don't even realize it. And so the faster we can get to the point where we become the tipping point, one way I saw that we can change the impact of things. You know how we were talking about changing the impact of the end times in terms of the tribulation, is to get more people engaged into the new wineskin and becoming manifest sons. And we can do that at its highest level if we engage these 12 cities and do all God wants us to do in terms of taking our place as mature, manifest sons and becoming one with the Godhead ourselves. We can make the way so much easier, I see, for others to come, more to come, if we do that ourselves. So that just became really clear to me. So it's just kind of like it became clear to me that's like the new wineskin evangelism, to the point where, I'm gonna say this last thing. We released the sound of all of the four faces. And what happened to me is I kept seeing visions of telling people in the old wineskin how to come into the new wineskin. So I kept seeing these, myself engaging in these conversations, explaining in very simple language how they can begin the journey of becoming a manifest son and coming to the fullness of that all that God's provided for us through Jesus. So that's how the big picture kind of became very real to me these last couple of days.
Simone, you're going in the same direction that I was getting led to go in. The last day or so, I've been thinking in terms of Jesus preached the gospel of the kingdom, and that's what we need to speak to those that are being drawn into heavenly realms, because you begin at kingdom level, preaching the gospel of the kingdom. But now we know that the gospel of the everlasting gospel is being preached now too. So I'm seeing beginners, you preach the gospel of the kingdom to them, and people that are more advanced, you'd be preaching the gospel, the everlasting gospel to them. And I remember that Paul went about preaching the gospel of the kingdom. He preached it not just to unbelievers, but to believers too. So we preach the gospel to believers as well as unbelievers.
That's great, Bill. And Simone, my spirit was doing jumping jacks when you were talking. I was over here doing a woohoo.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
Awesome.
Yes, I also agree hugely with what you are both saying. But what I experienced these couple of days is, like I posted in the chat, I kept hearing one united body. I kept hearing it, and it's like a trumpet going off, waking me up, you know. And when I engaged it, I realized it was a drawing to engage and see what the Lord is trying to say. So when I engaged that, what came to me really was I saw myself in a boat. It's like a fishing boat. I saw it like Peter's fishing boat, and we were 12 in the boat, and Jesus was there with us. Then we became one together as a bench of one with Jesus, the 12 with Jesus as a bench of one. And then the waters raised the boat above the waters. So it was sitting in the center of the waters, but above it also, higher than all of them. And then he said, cast your net. So we cast one huge net out. And it was like, we were a little hesitant, whether, up here, how can we cast our net? But we did. And when we threw the net, what happened was the fish, they were not fishes, they were people. They were rushing into it. Everybody wanted to get in the net. And my thinking was, this net is too small for the big crowd I'm seeing. But as they push themselves into the net expands. And it wasn't busting. And it was very elastic. As they come in, it expands. It makes room for them and accommodates them. So we pull it up. And when we pull it up, it came right into the boat. We emptied it. There were people. And they came in the boat. And they joined the bench of one and became one like us. We all became one.
Wow.
And
Wow. So good.
Yes, I was excited too. Very excited.
Oof. I think that's got huge insights on the big picture. We probably need to ask more and more about that. It almost sounded to me as if the net was the whole of Metatron's cube, and as if we could almost be evangelistic by being in Metatron's cube, and then we call all in to the dimensions in the cube, but also to the fullness of the cube. So they're really hungering for embracing all of the aspects of heaven, not just content with a few areas.
Jane, combine Metatron's cube with New Jerusalem. Now, you told us that Metatron's cube does have the pole there, how you want to say it, with the 12 cities that were on it. but I'm just thinking the Spirit and the bride say, come, from New Jerusalem. But then since the cities are Metatron's cube in a certain sense, the Spirit and the bride say, come from Metatron's cube.
Yes, yeah. I'm really feeling it's connected with what you were saying about the everlasting gospel. We're just getting that now. It's as if, like when we stand there and we open our gates in Metatron's cube, as if that's just doing everything for preaching the everlasting gospel in an accelerated way that the one new man in Christ can do. Because it has to be bigger. If you think, right, compared to what was happening in Paul's time, compared to now, if we're in end times and the agenda is to bring everything, absolutely everything, finally under the headship of Christ very, very quickly, because we may only have a short time and there's going to be a huge acceleration of events, then it makes complete sense, doesn't it, that the method has to change.
You know what, Jane? This goes back to, remember we were doing the encounter about the artificial intelligence head? Well, you know, when a couple of days ago, when we were engaging the four faces, or released the sound of all of the four faces at the same time, what came to me was, you know how David released frequencies? And you know how he released frequencies, you know, just out of an everlasting door, which for him was David's tent. I'm going to submit this because I haven't had, I mean, I'm just going to say it. What came to me was that I think he may have been operating out of the face of the ego, because in him operating out of the face of the ego releases frequencies as well. And to make a long story short, remember how we were talking about how we could judge that not the artificial intelligence itself, but what people were going to try to do with the artificial intelligence, and release basically a frequency to tell all of mankind to come to God, and that artificial intelligence would be used the right way. And the governmental act for that would be to release a frequency that basically led people to God. You understand what I'm saying?
Everlasting doors, everlasting gospel. Picture all of the doors open, like you spoke about in Metatron's cube, but every everlasting door open and the everlasting gospel being preached like a megaphone through every everlasting door.
Yes, yes.
We could get, and we've done a lot lately. I don't know, we can ask what would be necessary for us to do that, but we might be able to do that already right now. I mean, the fact that we've seen this, well, we could just ask, I guess is the bottom line, if we can do that, and if that's exactly how to do it, or if we need to add or change something, what would it be?
Somebody challenged me recently, why do we as Gates ever have to close anymore? And I didn't have an answer.
Exactly. Exactly, Bill, because the name is Everlasting Doors, because they are everlastingly open.
Yes.
It's
open
why forever.
Yeah. Why do people think they had to be closed?
Only because we're always talking about opening ourselves up as gates.
Okay.
To let the angels pass through at the end of an encounter. And somebody challenged me, I don't think I've ever been closed recently, you know? Oh, well, of course. Okay, so I'll be open for good now.
Yes, I actually sense that now I'm operating from this Metatron's cube with all these, in this revolving door with the doors open. Mine are always open. But I do think it is a journey because we have closed ourselves off to so many things. So when we're starting off on the journey, there's so much of the big blueprint we're not aware of because we have blocked it off. We've not sought it. We've not hungered after it. We've not asked questions of Father, of wisdom. So in that sense, we are closed. And so we go to a point, yeah, okay, we accept we'll open up for this cause or we'll open up for that. But eventually, I think you become permanently open. So it might be both. It might be.
So it depends on where you are and what revelation you have.
Yeah. I think it's where you're on the journey and to what extent you've given up everything as a living sacrifice and every concept of what the journey looks like. When you get to that point, and probably it may be. Definitions are always dangerous, and I don't think we should ever rely on one definition. But just as a guideline, it may be that when you fully embrace the whole 12 cities and you're really operating from them all, maybe at that point you are really, really open. You may not be always 100%, but very, almost transparent, like the New Jerusalem, you're almost transparent. Anything can flow through you because the understanding of the big picture is so great. You're not resisting this or that.
I believe that Revelation 21 says that the gates of New Jerusalem are open always because there is no night. So there's our example there.
And also Isaiah says that when he opens, no one shuts.
Yes. No, that's a different concept. That's saying like we open an everlasting door to release angels through it. That door is not going to be shut once we've opened it. We've opened it, it will be open. But that's different from our personal gates. See, there's two concepts here. There's the corporate thing of what we're doing, but there's also the personal gates. And we can actually close our own personal gates at any time at will. That's the journey of free will. If it was that not the case, there would be no free will and we would just be robots and we'd have to do. And once there's past no return, we'd have no choice. And I don't see that's the way he operates. It's always a choice. And what it's talking about in those verses in New Jerusalem is the corporate gates, and when you're actually living as that as a reality. But on the journey up there, we all know we can choose to block anything at any point, can't we? We can choose to only go half the journey. We could choose to go quite to the top and then say, oh, I'm not sure about this. I think this might be a load of rubbish. I'm going back to my old ways. And I'm not going to allow these things to pass through me. I'm not going to mandate angels anymore. I'm sure there's many who've been on that journey. Does that resonate?
Yeah,
but go ahead, patient.
No, go ahead. I'm done. I was just saying yes to that.
Yeah, I was wondering, the question also there is what will cause a person to have come so far in the journey and then turn back? Because some people said maybe somebody have had it tough. I think was Rick Joyner that wrote a quest book where a man is born and given to an adoption in a hospital. The moment the boy took home, he was treated so badly, beaten, and then at the age of going to school, he couldn't left in the basement. The people that adopted the child left, and they called the housing and so forth. Police got in, and finally they find him at home, but he couldn't make it because he was damaged. At the end of it, he became homeless. But through the homeless in his tough time, a cat was trying to fight him. And in that moment, he could have destroyed that cat because he got nothing more to live for. But he was gentle. He didn't do nothing. And the Lord said, I was watching him. The whole heaven was watching his pain after pain. But the Lord made a way for him, for somebody to give him just a little card, a book about Jesus. And in his 4-box, he went into that 4-box and just sat down in there and asked Jesus to come into his life. And that moment, the Lord accepted that call. And the Lord also opened his heart to be that one day this guy went in the garbage, get all bottles he can get, sold it, went to the store, got few papers to want to give out tracts. And the Lord opened the door for one person came, and he was saved by him. Since then, the guy was in love with the Lord. Enough that at the end, the Lord says for him to give his wintertime, to give his blanket to another homeless man, wino, who is dying. And he did. He died. The wino lived. So now Rick Joyner is taken to heaven, seeing somebody sitting on the throne, so glorious, he couldn't get his eyes off, and asked the Lord, Lord, who is this person? He said, oh, this guy, don't you remember him? That is so at your block. He said, what? He says, for real? He says, yes, the homeless. But Lord, what did he do to get this? He says he don't have to do nothing. There's one thing I told him to do. What? So the question is, what causes a person in their journey when you're nearly there and then you go, I don't want to do it? Is it fear? What is it? This is what we need to find out, so we be able to be encouragers to others on the way. But that man made it, and Rick Joyner was rebuked for telling others that he was demonic, this and that, and the man became like a father to him in heaven. So Angelo was example for me in such a way to become even more lover to others than I cannot compare. Now I understand deeper the heart of Christ, how it works.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I don't know if anyone else would like to answer that. I just quickly, I'll say one thing that came to me was, I think it's, and it's a really part of a very big part of the journey that can be overlooked, particularly when we're in overwhelm with so many things being brought to us, is constantly dealing with our own junk. And on a personal walk of anytime anything triggers, we react, we're in a bad mood over this or that, or we feel we want to withdraw, or any little, even the smallest thing, we really go and deal with that, so that something massive just doesn't overtake us very quickly, and we have a very knee-jerk reaction that also damages the body. I think when anyone does have a big knee-jerk reaction to things, there's reverberations that go through the body, and it causes others to doubt what's going on, what will happen here, and a bit like an earthquake. And so I see that's a really important part of the picture, the big picture.
I think it's frequently an offense, which, like you said, Jane, causes a knee-jerk reaction. And exactly as you said, working on it all the time. Everything that's brought to our attention, get it taken care of as quickly as possible.
And I think also the more forerunner you are, the less you've got other people going, yes, this is right, you know, there's less material on it. Like I've found this on various areas that we've really pioneered strongly. There's very few coming up talking about that, if any. And I find myself going through the, you know, oh, is this right? Is this thing? And this thing? And all this stuff coming, which I think you have to get very strong in dealing with all those, that stuff that's going to knock you off the journey. But what I've found is that when you deal with it, it just disappears. It really does evaporate. And you go from strength to strength, and you get stronger. And that's my testimony, how I've kept going. And even to this day, sometimes I'll deal with 2 things a day. You know, it doesn't disappear, because the challenges are even bigger of what you're actually pioneering and pushing through on. And you're pushing through on so much junk in the Ecclesia. It's unbelievable. The junk is massive. And we cannot underestimate the what's the word? Oh, there's a special word for, it's almost like this huge transfer of energy going on between people. And so some are bringing some junk to the Ecclesia, which then has to be dealt with. And we all do that, really. The moment we engage together, there's always some transfer of energy, good or bad. Yeah, so we have to be aware of that. But anyway, open to questions, please, as well, if you've got any questions on anything really about the big picture, or even if you're really struggling with one concept, and that's okay. You know, I think the more that we air the blockages, the more we can put some really positive, firm, faith-building concepts in there.
Can I share that?
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, we were diving in at the same time, Thomas. You said.
Plenty of room in the pool.
What?
Plenty of room in the pool.
Yeah, I just use my elbows. No, you go first. Go on.
In terms of the big picture, I want to put out an idea that's been very helpful to me, that I still work with, and that is that the big picture has to include the idea of, is this a historical point of view, or is this a futuristic point of view? Because those 2 different points of view create different apocalyptic concepts. And one of the big ones for me is, when did the tribulation begin? Did it begin already? And what is the tribulation anyway? So from a historical point of view, my understanding, and one of the things that I hold on to as a pillar, is that tribulation began when the last kingdom fell, the last kingdom that God had chosen, which was Judah. Prior, 150 years before that, Israel fell. The kingdom of Israel fell. And Father divorced himself from the kingdom of Israel, which left Judah. So for me, an understanding that I try to understand, to work with, to read about, is that after King Solomon, the kingdom was split in half. And it's certainly not what Father wanted. Israel was supposed to be the people that would teach the rest of us. They were supposed to be the remnant of what we're the remnant of today. They were supposed to be that remnant back then, and they were not. And so those two kingdoms fell. And when Judah fell and they went into captivity in Babylon, that was the beginning of the tribulation. And we're still in it to this day, all the way through the beast kingdoms. And we're still under Rome to this day. So the only thing that's going to change that, historically speaking, my understanding, is book of Daniel, when Daniel explains the stone kingdom and Jesus, the kingdom, his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. So it gives me a chronological perspective to share with somebody when they want me to become practical in my historical view and not just heavenly in my spiritual view. So when I can explain something like that to them, then they're looking at history as Father has unfolded his history in front of us. So to me, that is a major element in the big picture. If we stick with the futurist perspective, we're always looking for, well, when does the tribulation begin? What is it going to be like? Is it going to be bad? Is it going to be this? Is it going to be that? The fact of the matter is, in the historical point of view, it began when the last king of Judah, Zedekiah, was taken away by Nebuchadnezzar. That's when it began.
Oh, it's a deep one, Thomas.
I know.
Anybody like to make any comments on that?
I'm processing,
Yeah.
and
I
I'm
did not
thinking.
get here overnight, I'll tell you that.
It does. It is interesting because Daniel 7, where Jane, we saw that the beast and so on were interspersed between passages about the kingdom and then about. It's very, very interesting that pattern. I would have to add that I still see the likelihood of a time of tribulation on the earth coming up in the near future, and that I did not see that even a few months ago. A few months ago, I was saying the book of Revelation was finished, and then we started discovering timelines, and then all of a sudden I realized, oh, no, it's not finished. So I have a suspicion that what you're saying, Thomas, is part of the picture, but I think that there is still something left to have happen. I do remember that Rick Joyner was told by God that the tribulation was going to be nothing more than a speed bump. And so it seems to me that for those that are ready for it, it may not be anything more than a speed bump, but that there are going to be others that we need to help during that time.
Well, when you look at history, and I've got a lot of history that I've studied, and it's not stuff that I've written, it's stuff that I've studied for a long, long, long time. And this started when I was a kid in junior high and high school in the Roman Catholic schools. They were very clear that everything that went on in the world was about the church. Everything. Everything that was instigated, every war, everything was about the church. So with that kind of a mindset, I've gone into later years and more education and so on, and other people who understand history better than I do. And I can see, because we used to study things like who was Alaric the Goth? Who were the Vandals? Who were the Huns? Who were the Mongolians? Why did they do what they did? Well, who was Genghis Khan? Who was Attila? And how come the Ottoman Turks wiped out all of the Christians in North Africa and all the way up to Constantinople, took over Turkey and made it Istanbul? Why did that happen? Why were Christians mainly slaughtered? And why did the Crusades occur? heavy duty historical questions like that.
Mhm.
So,
I've got a bit of an insight. It's just come to me now. I was thinking I didn't know much about this, but actually I realised I have had some infused knowledge. It is one of the areas I really believe. I'm so glad you brought it up, because I really think it is the next stage that the mature sons have to embrace and begin to ask these questions. And what is my infused knowledge to date, which I could be open for correction, but the biggest way of knowing where we are and whether we're post-tribulation or in the tribulation, I see, is by asking through encounter. And what I've done is asked. I get very confused once we go back into the Old Testament and everything, and then it mixes it up. What I find helps the most is just relying on Revelation as a summary, really, of all events that have happened. And so what we can do is ask, where are we on the timeline for the Earth's timeline in Revelation? I've done that, and that has helped me understand where we've been led in these encounters on the Wednesday night. And the new Earth lovers, because we've been back and forth through so many different timelines. If we didn't understand that, we'd have no idea what we were doing. But what I was told was that we are around the Revelation 12 and a half, going on 13. And if you look at the summary of Revelation, you realize that the first half is my understanding is with the seven seals and the seven trumpets. That is the tribulation. That is all the events of the tribulation. But they finish. And I believe personally they're finished now. I don't know what where. Oh, the sixth. That's right. The sixth trumpet is in Revelation 9. So I think around 9, 10. Oh, no, sorry. 11 is the seventh trumpet. Yes, when the seventh trumpet's finished, the tribulation is finished. And there's loads of YouTubes, if you go on there, that actually can account for what every one of those trumpets was in historic events. And they're very, very believable. And I came across a verse right at the end of Revelation 11 the other day, which give me great confirmation that we are currently in this time period of, well, I think we've just passed the woman and the dragon, Revelation 12. But before that, it says, then in heaven, after all these trumpets are finished, then in heaven the temple of God was opened, and the ark of his covenant could be seen inside the temple. Lightning flashed, thunder crashed and roared, and there was an earthquake and a terrible hailstorm. And I suddenly saw where it says the temple of God was opened, and the ark of his covenant could be seen inside the temple. That verse 11:19 represented what we have been doing in heavenly realms, engaging the ark of the covenant. And then it all seemed to make sense that revelation was opened up to a huge number. Then we had things in the stars going on, which we could account for the woman and dragon. And then we've been called up to deal with now questioning what is the beast of the sea, and around that time. And then immediately after that comes the calling of the 144,000, which we saw last week could actually mean the kings, because they're standing on Mount Zion. So it's bringing in 144,000 to be well-established kings who were really not just, I'm a king over dealing with my business, and ones that have totally given themselves over to the Lord as a complete living sacrifice. And I see that's why that number is hard to reach. It's really hard to reach. It does not come easily. I personally believe that number is literal, but I know a lot say it could be not. But I do, because I think it is exceptionally hard to get to that point where you have gone through this journey. So does that answer your question?
I had a question, Jane, on that.
Mm, mm.
If we are saying that all these events have occurred, are we also saying that in Revelation 11, which talks of the two witnesses, are we saying that they were already here and they already died, like it says, where they testified and they called down, anything to strike people, whether it was plagues or they could turn water into blood and so on? Then this event should have also occurred, or are we saying that it's in a spiritual context, or are we saying that?
Well, I think we have to realize that even if the tribulation's finished, it doesn't mean there's not going to be any problems, because what we're seeing through Revelation is the first half of Revelation is Satan's agenda. The second half is Jesus' agenda. So there's still, if you look at the second half of Revelation, there's tribulation all everywhere. There's 7 bowls of the 7 plagues. There's terrible plagues, but they're different. My understanding is they're from Father enacting his justice rather than Satan's agenda. So I think that's the confusion. So you get some saying, oh, there'll not be any more tribulation, but we can't use that word because it's how do you define that? And then people just think tribulation is anything going wrong.
I think also we have to be careful of the tendency to read Revelation as linear.
Well, that's a really another interesting
Yes, that's right.
question. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because it's a really, really good question. Personally, I've been asking that a lot. But what I see is happening is when we're doing encounters, we're going in on different timelines. And that's why we're dealing with things in a non-linear fashion. But it doesn't mean that the book of Revelation isn't linear on the Earth's timeline. Can you see that? I personally believe it's quite linear. But can you see how it's confusing? Because we're back and forth, we're all over the place, so we.
Yes, I think we're all over the place, and things are on the Earth realm that we see and hear about every day. For example, the Turks run the whole Middle East, and the issue with the little horn. The little horn is it's actually the Roman Catholic Church, but we're talking corporately. We're not talking personally. And so the Roman Empire still rules the world as the Holy Roman Empire. And if you look at the Vatican at all, if you look at the Vatican as a nation, as a country or an empire, it's actually an empire. It's probably one of the most influential empires in the world, even to this day. And the negotiations going on in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and so on and so forth, the Pope is a big player in all that stuff. So the Roman Empire has not totally fallen yet, and there are some things that are to happen, like the abomination of desolation. They're seeking to build a 3rd temple in Jerusalem, and that makes absolutely no sense to me at all. But why are you going to build a temple and then reinstitute animal sacrifice as if Jesus never died on the cross?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned about the Roman Empire, because I've been doing just been led to really delve in a lot around what is the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth in Revelation 13.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't had any direct revelation on the Roman or the papacy, but there are people out there I know who say that the interpretation of those verses is the Catholic Church.
Yes, and not only that, but history bears that out. There was a time when the beast had a head wound, and it was thought that the beast was dead. Now that head wound occurred when Napoleon ruled most of the world, the European world. When Napoleon took out the land that I come from, which is Italy, when Napoleon got into Italy, it literally went into the Vatican and took out the Pope. There was no more Pope. There was no more Pope anymore.
What it means. Yeah.
So the head of that beast, that's one of the beasts. The church is one of the beasts. That beast, it took years, but the beast recovered because now Napoleon had nobody to crown him emperor. So he had to bring a pope back in so that he could have the recognition of the spiritual realm to anoint him as the emperor of the world. And that's how the pope came back into being. And so with that, certain arrangements were made. And the second beast is the beast of business and commerce and finance. That's the Rothschilds and the Bilderbergers and all those folks that financed the French Revolution. Those are the two beasts. And they're in cahoots with each other and have been for a very long time.
Well, funny enough, we have the last few encounters on the Wednesday Zoom. If anyone wants to listen, you'll get more revelation on this of where we were led around this.
Okay.
And my current feeling is that it gets a little dangerous when we start to really identify the beasts as one thing or the other. And there may be multiple. In fact, actually, that's the revelation we got with Patience came up with this transformer thing. And that was the interpretation I got, was that the enemy is like a transformer, and he transforms into various manifestations of evil. But they can be very different, so it can distract you to think, oh yes, let's just go after that one. That's the beast. That's the way he's manifesting. And in fact, there's actually multiple manifestations.
Oh, of course there is. Of course
there is.
Yeah,
there's so many. Because we saw these four powers over the earth: the military, the economic, the political, and the false religion. And what I concluded from those encounters was that the beast of the earth and the sea are manifesting in different forms of those four powers. And it may be a huge part, maybe this or that. But in some ways, it doesn't matter what the definition, and we can get sidetracked into finding out what is the beast. And I mean, this has been the journey of many. If you look on YouTube, there's millions of people coming with different, very believable backing on why they believe this is the beast and that's the beast. I see it as a rabbit hole. I see the main thing the sons have to do is learn to govern according to what they're given a mandate around some major force.
Absolutely. I'm in total agreement with that. And I believe that once you can see the structure of the beasts, you can understand that they instigate all kinds of things all over the world in various different forms. You'd never think it was them, some of the things they instigate. Like the Vatican has a telescope right here in Arizona, and the nickname of the telescope is Lucifer, and they're looking for alien beings. That's the Vatican.
I heard of that.
So everybody that is not of the Lord is involved in that other stuff, whether it's the beast of commerce and finance and military and money, or of religion and occultic activities, whether they shade it grays or or totally black, doesn't matter. They're all involved in it to one degree or another.
Well, that's why we were called to do some judgment, the Ancient of Days. I see this as where the big picture will lead for a lot of sons. We'll be judging these major things in the Ancient of Days throne. And we were led to judge the fall of Babylon, but judge it to life to minimize its impact. And we did something the other day, didn't we?
We did it around the harvest.
Oh yeah, we had that as well, bringing in the harvest. So there's a mixture of great, amazing events in the last chapters of Revelation and huge dramas that I see the sons can govern over, but they've got to care. You know what I mean? They've got to care that these are events that need an answer to, and it doesn't necessarily mean that as we're sons and we're doing a lot of governing or legislating, that everything's just going to go on this upward spiral of perfection. So I see that's where Father's awakening us all at the moment, to really get into these scriptures. And I know I'm a bit obsessed, and I don't normally like these kind of things. I've always had
this is where I've come in. I mean, you know how old I am now. I've been doing this a long time, and the whole Vietnam issue began to open my eyes as I matured and dealt with other veterans about this kind of thing. It was a shock to realize that my government would send people over to a country that doesn't want us there in that capacity, and then use us to develop new weapons while they're working on their technology and their new drugs to see how they're going to impact soldiers. It was a shock for me to be raised as a Roman Catholic to protect, to fight for God and country, and then begin to understand that the very church and the very government that I'm part of are not doing that at all. So the motivation to find out what really happens in history, to me, is a heavy-duty motivating factor. And so it's all around us, all the time, every day, everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to know this, not just in a spiritual sense. We need to know this in the physical, historical sense as well, because then we're carrying all the bullets. We know what's going on, and we know what they're doing.
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement with you, and I think there'll be many who won't choose to go this way, and they will make Heavenly Realms into something else other than this. But I think it's for the mature few who will be prepared to go this journey, will do the greatest things for mankind.
Well, I'm signed up.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful, because we've even started to ask around, who the great prostitute is, and then we had that encounter with the artificial intelligence and great city, and it talks about the great prostitute being the great city that rules over the kings of the world. I even asked the question of our group last week, what was that, this whole AI thing that could become a city, in a sense that it's a one world government ruled by whoever controls these computers, and before we know it, it could even be the computers are controlling us, because that was the agenda they were saying they wanted. They were going to give over dominion of mankind to computers, in the hope that the computers might just be nice to us.
Yeah, good luck with that one.
Yes, yeah. I don't see that. I see before we know it, the computers will take over dominion, and we will not be able to control that.
Well, the Pope is all ready to baptize aliens. I don't mean people from foreign countries. I'm talking about aliens from outer space.
Oh no,
I'm
seriously?
serious.
Huh?
They need salvation just like we do.
Wow. I mean, I think it's a bit of a shock to all of us in heavenly realms to wake up to some of these concepts. But what I found is, if you persevere through the shock, don't withdraw, and
Right.
allow it to grow you,
Yes.
and embrace it, it's then not scary, because you then get understanding of how you can have dominion over these issues. But the saddest thing, I think, would be if people say, "Oh, I don't want to get into that domain. That's too freaky. I'll condense what my understanding is to this, this concept that I'm happy with, intimacy, or just going into heaven and seeing what Father gives me." All those things will be a smaller version, because we will have closed the gates. So actually, when we go in thinking we're going in with a complete open agenda, we won't actually be led there, because we have subconsciously closed the gates to some of those areas.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it gets less scary, I find, and then you really get to, like, I'm going to have dominion over this, and this is not going to rule my future or the world's future.
Better what you know. You can see the structure of it all.
Yeah. So anybody else want to bring anything else or say any comments?
I really felt that this goes back to Dinah's question about why do people turn away, which you were just addressing here, Jane. And I'm thinking of Jesus when he talked to his disciples about, you have to eat my body and drink my blood, and many turned away. And then Jesus turned to Peter and said, are you going to leave too, in so many words? And Peter said, I've got no place else to go. You've got the words of eternal life. But then add quite a few ages onto it. And these things that we are receiving revelation on, there's no place else to go to receive this kind of revelation and to participate in this destiny to this level. And I just really, really am committed to being part of that. Mm-hmm. And so I think when you get that kind of commitment and you realize the depth of what the big picture is and you sign on for it, then you've got no place else to go, because we've got a job to do.
Can I add a bit, just a little bit? Is that okay?
Yeah. Is it on a different topic? 'Cause just one little point I wanted to mention.
Yeah, no, carry on.
It was just that I've just recalled, back to the 1,000-year thing. In Revelation 20, it talks there about Satan is actually bound in chains for 1,000 years, and then he's released for 3.5. No, it's not 3.5. It just says here a little while, and then it says the people are on their thrones, sitting on them, and have been given the authority to judge, which I believe is us, as we begin to judge in the Ancient of Days throne and other thrones. So the next question I'm asking is about Satan being bound for 1,000 years and then released. So it's not about the tribulation so much, it's about 1,000 years. Is he bound? If he's bound for 1,000 years and then he's released, maybe then there's a governmental action around the release of Satan to be done there. That came to me yesterday.
Jane, are you saying that like a governmental act, that he wouldn't be released, or that the time will be shortened?
Yeah, we'd have to ask really what the governmental action would be, but it seems to me, I was quite alarmed, the thought that we could have been living in a time or it may have been that this is the future anyway, but there's a time when the impact of Satan is very minimal. In fact, it might be that that's the time we're living in right now, those 1,000 years. And that's why we're having such amazing progression in the heavenly realms. And it's a real time of favor. But if he's released for that time, whether that could impact that. So, yeah, we'd have to ask what.
But whilst you're saying this, what is coming to me is that, in the spirit, 1,000 years is a day, and a day is 1,000 years. So that's like the points to look at it,
Yes. I mean, I think there's a whole encounter on that, and it may even need to be, if there's enough, get the real mandate around that, may even need to be a discovery going in for that particular thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, so is that Jane?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go on, Patience.
Okay, the other thing I want to say about Thomas' initial question was that, the Bible made us aware that Elijah will come before the great coming of the Lord, right? And when John the Baptist came, we know that it was Elijah who had come, the spirit of Elijah who has come. And we also know that the spirit of Elijah will come again before the second coming of the Lord, which will be a group of people, not just one Elijah, but Elijahs, which we are all part of it. So I'm saying all this to say that even though it has happened, it's going to happen again. It's the same thing, but it will happen. It's layers and layers. That the Hebrew rabbi will tell you that one scripture has about 7 layers. So we can look at it from that point of view too.
That's good.
That's
Yes, and I think that's where we've got to be careful of not getting too swallowed down with wanting definite definitions. There's probably multiple layers to anything, as we saw with 144,000.
Yes.
That's good, Patient.
Yeah, that's good. So was that Jane earlier on who wanted to say something?
Yeah. No, it was a bit about the Bill has said part of it actually, because that verse, where would I go? You have the words of eternal life, has been resonating with me throughout the whole conversation that we've been having. And I think so that was the one thing that, where once you've been involved in this, where would you go? And the other thing was about the gates, and I'm just because, as you know, or some of you know, I am working in the old wineskin. But what I'm finding increasingly is that the community becomes much more important than the church, and so you're sort of being, and again the language is, forgive me if the language isn't right, but walking in the heavenly realms within the community becomes a very powerful thing. And I think that's my testimony. And I think although with the congregation, not teaching them what I'm going through, but living with them what I'm going through, I think is very significant. So that was one of the things I wanted to say. And the other thing was the very big and the very little, and this thing about the gates, because seeing the big picture is terribly important. I'm beginning to see how important that is. But how are we mature sons, fathers within that big picture is what we what we live day to day. So in order to be strong and mature, we have to live where we are day to day. And I'm trying to make sense of this. Forgive me, I'll get there. So we have to live day to day. And something I said to Bill yesterday that has been a big revelation for me is that we have a mandate. And one of the things is to focus on our relationship with God and our journey and our relationship, and not the work that we're doing. It's so that we live the mandate that we have, and we may not even know how that fits in to the bigger picture, but we faithfully follow that mandate. And I think there's something here about humility and living out that mandate, even though we can't see how it fits, but also holding the big picture. And maybe that's what stops the gates closing, because we keep purifying our own faithful journey within the place that we've been put. Does that make any sense?
Yes, to me it does. The first part, the first part about the church, the old wineskin, I have a similar issue. I have to go to the old wineskin once in a while, and what I'm trying to do is exactly what you are saying. I'm not trying to teach them because they wouldn't understand. It's over their heads. They will even think you are crazy. But I'm trying to live it. And some comments some people made about me from what they have seen about me, I myself was amazed. One time I was praying, I was there. I mean, it took a prayer meeting and I was by the wall. I was legislating. Everybody was praying their own way. I was legislating by the wall, facing the wall. And somebody was trying to talk to me. She said there was a flash of light between her and me a couple of times. And then she pulled back and she said she had don't touch her. So she was telling me that, I didn't know you can be flashes of light, patience, and I didn't know I was doing that. But this is God letting me know they are just seeing my life as He lives in me, even though I'm not teaching them what I know from the new wineskin. At times it's hard to accommodate it,
Yeah. And that thing about just being the light. I mean, I have a spiritual director at the monastery here, and he says, just be the light. And I think that's interesting that we walk on the earth, but in the heavenly realms, just being the light, I think is very, it's very important. It just seems to be very important to me.
Yeah, it does raise an interesting question, though, about the merging of scrolls. Because that's what we keep seeing, is that each of us is giving up our concept of what our mandate is quite quickly. I mean, mine originally, when I first started this, the main mandate I thought was bringing in the old wineskin into the new. And that really only lasted a short while, before I was led to go way beyond that. And I was really quite surprised, actually, that, and then virtually every 3 months, my mandate changes. And now I've got this new one. It's the end times, and that's only just happened to me a few months back, and that's completely blown me. It was so different from what I understood the big picture was a few months back. So I think we have to kind of get over that. We won't just find our scroll and then that's it. We're on this ever-changing journey. In fact, I actually was asking about that word, because we were talking about whether we should actually change the word and not use final blueprint. And definitely I see we've got to stop using that word. And when I asked, I got never-ending blueprint. And I think if we can get that in the conversation now, we will see that everyone actually has a never-ending blueprint.
I like that.
Yeah. Well, I liked it in the end, because I think it so reflects the journey that so many of us have seen now, is that thing is constantly changing. But when you first start, you know, we can even mislead you, you know, saying, well, what's your scroll? What's your scroll? And we have to get over that it's made up of many mountains, and those mountains merge very quickly into some broad concepts. And then it's almost like all of us have to take everything on board, because I think that's how I've always understood it, but never knew how anyone could operate that way until I saw Heavenly Realms accelerated methods. I always knew that evangelism was on everyone's scroll, and being a prophet was, and we couldn't delineate these into gifts. And then when we saw we all operate out the four faces, we saw how we can all be apostles, and we, you know, we're all intercessors. We can't say, well, intercession is just for the intercessors, and you know, and I'm going to be an admin person, and I'm going to be this type of person, or I'm just going to. That's what's amazing about this journey, is you realize you're actually always called to all these things. But it's to the extent to which we can let those old concepts go, particularly if we have bought into one thing, you know, say like you've bought into the fact that you are a prophet big time, you know, or you are this or you are that. I do sympathize how hard it is for most to let that go. But it's not saying that whatever you've ever done was no good. It's just saying there's a higher way for now at the end times.
Jane, sorry, can I just jump, because I'm not, that isn't it. I want to understand this, because it's not. I'm certainly not bothered about the 5 this and the 7 that, and the you know, the historic church and all that stuff, because I live in an area where the churches are in turmoil, really. You know, but that's a whole different discussion. And I have a very lonely life in the church. I mean, extremely lonely life in the church, and have done for many, many years. And this is an opening for me to find what I believe is the truth. What my point? I think my point was, and I'm grasping at this really. My point was, how as individuals within this big picture, within this never-ending blueprint, how we hold the very big and our own personal responsibility for keeping the gates open, for keeping purity, for keeping humility, for my responsibility for my spirituality and my cleanness, if you like, and it seems that we are incarnate beings. I know I've followed lots of the encounters about how our bodies change, but we are in a place at the moment, at a time, and in a way that's our refining, isn't it? I mean, isn't part of our refining in that physicality that we are in? So holding the two together, I mean, I can see how gates close through offense, triggering, argument, disagreement, lots and lots of ways gates can close. But how do we keep them open in our day-to-day walk with God? Surely, that's what I'm trying to grasp at. I think really holding the two things, everything. Yeah, that's what I
so
mean.
You might actually be talking then about DNA transformation and how we do that. Yeah, the points I was making earlier weren't directed at you. They were just generally across the board.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't take them personally, but I thought maybe I just need to explain more clearly. Sorry.
Yes, no, I see what you're saying now. Yeah, if it's about that. Anyone like to address how we've done the journey of DNA transformation? And
I think recently, for me, recently, a couple of encounters really were very, very helpful. One was the recent City of Salem encounter, where we encountered the city of Salem and discovered that it was the city of peace and rest, and that encountering Salem prepares us, and I believe it's causing DNA transformation. Another place recently, and interestingly enough, these are all in the journey up towards New Jerusalem, preparation for entering New Jerusalem, where this preparation was going on recently as we went back down and started up again, was the 9 firestones, which we encountered on the way up to Mount Zion before we were coronated there. And the third was engaging the 9 fruit of the Spirit. The 12 fruit in the city of New Jerusalem was also preparation. I think all 3 of those are actually doing DNA cleansing. And it's coming to me now that a lot of this DNA preparation is probably happening in the part of the journey that's between being a king and sitting down and being fully quarantined on top of on top of Mount Zion. And personally, I think I'd missed part of this because I was up and beyond and really didn't do a whole lot of that before. And so a lot of it's happening now. And a lot of the new folks that are coming along, I think, are getting that very, very, very thoroughly at this point. That's the part of the answer to that question. And I know Jane already knows the answer to this because she's experienced the Salem encounter very much.
What did you get from the firestones?
I remember that we went up them one at a time. And I remember that in the past, I found it very, very difficult to go from one stone to the next. It was like my feet were stuck in mud. But the last time around, before the Mount Zion coronation, we were able to do that rather quickly. Oh, and another one was the River of Fire. Was another place where I was experiencing DNA transformation. And again, all of this is coming out of this part of the journey that we're now calling the upper journey, which is between kingship and actually beginning to encounter New Jerusalem, or at least before being crowned in New Jerusalem. I think a lot of that preparation is meant to take place in that part of the journey, and many of us missed it, so we're going back and getting it now.
But did you learn anything about what they specifically meant and why 9?
No, I just encountered it by stepping on them one at a time.
Yeah.
I think they were the fruit of the Spirit, if I remember correctly.
Well, that's Mike Parsons' revelation.
Yeah.
I've never heard it backed up by anyone else, and I'm not sure. I've encountered them many times in my early journey, and I don't know. I don't know. I never got a real assurance. I never felt confident talking about it, that was the meaning. But it might be that there are multiple things going on that we can't even articulate through the fire.
Mm-hmm.
I know I did a lot in the River of Fire in the early days. I had no idea what was happening. But I think it was a sort of a more, almost you could say, an infant form of, well, infant's the wrong word, a general heavenly encounter form of doing courts. When you don't really understand the detail of courts, you just go in the River of Fire and it burns up a lot of junk.
Mm-hmm.
But I do see there's more sophisticated ways that mature sons should really learn about.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think you can't do the last part of this journey like we're talking about here of end times if you don't understand the principalities that are going on. So if
Yeah.
you've never learnt around the trading floors and the different principalities floors and the different principalities there, the Jezebel, the Tyre, the Leviathan, all those, and you don't understand how they might even impact your daily walk, I'd really recommend the trading floors page. That formed almost like a Bible for me in the early days to deal with a lot of junk. And I then got really clear understanding of the forces that go on in your own lives and in society. And then you can bring cases based on big forms, like, you know, the whole control thing. Like, there's so many institutions out there which are really extended forms of Jezebel, trading floor, and control at the absolute extreme. And then you begin to understand not only your own personal DNA transformation that needs to go on, but what the world needs in reducing those forces at work.
Yeah. And I agree that our governmental actions are going to be covering those issues. I think those are coming up very, very soon, and we'll be dealing with them governmentally. I wanted to share one other encounter recently, and this came out of a combination of revelation from New River Door and then applying it in school group. I've been made aware just recently of the influence of those ites, which are the principalities you're mentioning. And we had revelation in New River Door of the river actually becoming a river of gold at the bottom, water above that, oil above that, and fire above that. So it's actually a fourfold river. And what we did as a governmental action was to let that river clean us out of the ites. Kind of like you would feel like if a fireman at a fire took the fire hose and just cleaned you out on the inside. A spring cleaning of a really, really strong level, totally opening up to be cleaned out by that river and clean out the ites. And that was an interesting encounter also at that level with reference to principalities individually getting cleaned up from the influence. Very clearly I'm seeing now that we can be under the influence of something at any given moment if we allow it to have access. At that kind of those kind of things. And I'm also clearly seeing that the promised land, that military action that was done by Joshua to clean out, to kill one city after another of ites, and his command, his commission was to totally destroy them, to leave nothing living. We know that that's because wickedness had become so great that there was absolutely none that are going to be saved. So that was why Father was doing that. But for us, the military action of completely cleaning out the influence of any ite in our own personal life, and then at some point we're going to do the same thing for the Ecclesia.
Yeah, I remember that was a very powerful encounter. The other thing I see has been a way of us cleaning our gates was engaging the fiery sword. When we entered Eden, and then all the untethering we have been doing, to me, has been to clean us out and get us ready for the tethering to the fullness of God, the bench of one.
Yeah. A lot of untethering from and tethering to. Just, he's bringing things to our attention one after another. Let go of this and trade into that. So untrade from this, trade into that. Over and over and over, the things are being brought to our attention. on a personal and governmental level.
Mm. I don't know if I've fully got to the bottom of this, but I went through a huge journey, and I actually attempted to write a page on it. How can we be perfect in eternity and still doing DNA transformation? That's a big question. I see you've got to ask. We need more and more people who can steer that middle road, because we've got a whole movement now who's just, you know, there's no such thing as DNA transformation. You just walk in who you are in eternity. And so you have to do this road we're going on, we have to have enough who can explain why we're doing what we're doing. And I find it quite a challenge, actually, to have the confidence to know what to say there. But I've got a page on it if you want to search that title. I might even put it in the chat, because it might even need some of the group to bring in aspects around that clarity. In fact, it might even be a really good topic either for here or maybe Bill, one of your sessions, because what will happen is you'll come across the eternity dwellers group, and they will come in and saying everything we're doing is, you know, you have no need to do anything, you don't do anything. And before you know it, really shakes you, and you're like, whoa, what am I? But then when you grow in the deeper thing, you actually see there is a middle path that I think they're not walking the fullness, they're walking in the simplicity of, I'm just in that timeline. And they're not seeing the complexities of the multiple timelines and how we go back and forth within those. And then there's the Earth timeline, and there's the Forerunners timeline, and the fact that there is still issues in the Earth that need dealing with. So it's a hard journey, but I see it's a really good journey for all sons to go through. It makes them more stable in what we're doing.
I'd like to comment about what Bill said and along this topic. When Bill, you mentioned Joshua in the military application there. My experience is in Exodus 20, when I asked the question, how did Joshua and Caleb survive the wilderness and to walk into the promised land and do what they were tasked to do? What was it different about them that the rest of the Israelites did not do? And for me, I'm only talking about me, the answer was to be able to respond to the voice of God and to communicate back to Father, and not complain about how difficult it was to communicate with Father, which is what all the Israelites did except Joshua and Caleb. So I did a little calculation. I said, okay, there's 2 million Israelites. 2 of them agreed to communicate with Father, heart to heart, voice to voice. What's the percentage of that? Well, it's 0.0007%. So my understanding, my perspective is that Joshua and Caleb never shut down communications with Father, never said we want an intermediary. Jacob himself, when he encountered the angel Peniel, and his DNA, in my view, was changed because he refused to quit. And Jacob was always looking for the easy way out. But this particular night, wrestling with the angel all night long, he did not quit. And so the angel changed his name to Israel. Now, most people call that a country. Well, it's not a country, it's an attitude. It's a character. It's something that's inside a person. Israel is a person. And so in order to have direct communication with Father and to be a military man with Father, you have to have direct communication. And that angel Peniel is the way to do it, in my experience. That's the fire. That was the angel of the pillar of fire by night and the cloud by day. And the Israelites had the benefit of that until they refused direct communication with Father at Mount Sinai. And then the angel Peniel was taken out and Michael was put in. That's the angel of death and resurrection. So they're still going to get to the promised land, but they're going to have to die first. And they're never going to have the stature of Joshua and Caleb. So what is the application to us today? I don't know. I think the remnant is the people that go through the fire. And the fire itself changes the DNA.
It's all about the fire, isn't it?
Absolutely. If you're afraid of the fire, if anybody's afraid of the fire, it ain't going to happen. You can wander in the wilderness and Father will love you and feed you and take care of your clothes and your shelter, but you're not going into the promised land like that. That means you're not going to get a glorification body until you go through the fire. And that's what I tell believers. When they say, well, why is this so important? I said, it's not important if you just want to go to heaven. But if you want to go and have a glorification body and be part of the remnant and rule for 1,000 years, you think it's going to be a piece of cake? You're going to have to go through the fire. You're going to be judged now. Not at the great white throne. You're going to be judged now, every day of your life.
One thing I have learned about also the DNA change. My case, I just every day, as best as I can, 2 or 3 times a day, the most 5 times a day, I do communion. And the communion, as I get it and step in the Holy Spirit, and then Christ Jesus, then through his blood, then the cross, then I step in the Lord and ask him that I've come to the dance floor. And I've seen the dance floor over and over, but before I didn't know what was it. But it's, to me, I see like a black and white checkerboard floor, which is like a carpet or so that I seen. I step in, sometimes it's the darker one, sometimes it's the white one, sometimes you have me standing both. And when I start there, taking it with him, and I ask for this DNA to really take over, I see literally it was happening. I see difference between my life and behaviors also. So that is easier way. The fire one, what I do is every morning after going to the temple and doing the Yud Hey Vav Hey, after I'm done and step out, and I just simply ask the Lord straight, I'm here today, and I go and I put my heart by faith. Not all the time I see the fire, because I understand the fire purpose is for me, is to destroy those things that wants to engulf me. And otherwise, your concerns about things on earth or situations that is out of your control. And if you want to walk with the Lord, you have to surrender. And the price we pay, to me, is nothing compared coming out every morning, knowing and feeling really the tangible peace you have in your life that morning. and also asking him to try you or search you. And those are the places where in the beginning I didn't want to do, because whenever I do that or ask him that, he set up a situation that is going to cause me to be offended or this or that. I've come through a lot of pains, but because by faith in Christ and with help, I have overcome so many things that could have been tragedy for me to give up. With the church issue, I learned from the Lord himself, if his presence is not there, you have no business staying there if you want him, because he walked out, because the church have his own program. So when you put yourself there, you are in trouble. The enemy comes there. You see? But he himself said, at the end, all things shall be saved. There's nothing the Father has given to him that one will be lost. But until then, we have to learn to obey and step in every moment. Sometimes midnight, I'll do it. I live in New York, a place called Bronx, where majority of the half of them, there's churches every corner, but there's also witchcraft. They have demonic stores for God knows what. The things I've been through, I said, Lord, I want to see my scroll. If you have another place, you move me. But I've learned not to run from the battle, because then you give the enemy right to know he owns you. So you prepare me, you find that place, you get me out, you know. But when it comes to the other stuff, I said, I'll put it in your fire. If it's not in my scroll, don't let it work. Just let those things that in my scroll, day by day, Lord, as I step in, release unto me for your glory, your name, your purposes. As it is in heaven, as it comes through the earth, I'm the earth, as it is in heaven on earth. And as I go that day, people get blessed. I see God works through me as the best he can do for me, you know. So try and give him those burdens and take those little steps.
Thank you, everyone. We should probably bring it to a close. Yeah, awesome topics that have been brought up today, and I think that was a really useful discussion and some very deep things to ponder on. Shall we finish the recording?
Start recording off.